Hello, and welcome to the Nothing Notable podcast. My name is Daniel Elmore, and today I am joined by Tyler, Justin Prine, and Jack Hubert, as I am every week. And we are going to be talking about one of our favorite shows from 2020. Yes, we're talking about The Queen's Gambit. We're a little bit late to the party, but we have a very in-depth conversation about the show. We go episode by episode and break down everything that we loved about this series. So if you're a fan of The Queen's Gambit, I think you'll enjoy this. And without any more delay, let's go ahead and jump right into the conversation. Let's just start with how you came to know about this show. Because for me, I saw that it was in the top 10 trending on Netflix category for like 2 straight weeks. And all of a sudden I started seeing a lot of media hype and a lot of people on Twitter starting to say like, oh, The Queen's Gambit, The Queen's Gambit, The Queen's Gambit. This show is amazing. Anya Taylor-Joy. And so that's kind of what got me into it initially. How is it that you guys came to be acquainted with and then became involved in watching the show?
Yeah, for me, when I saw Anya Taylor-Joy just like on Netflix, I was like, oh, this seems interesting because I really liked her work in Split and Glass, but also Thoroughbreds is a really good, great movie that she's in. She is just incredible in that. And when I saw that she was doing this thing called The Queen's Gambit, I was like, oh, cool. I'll watch it eventually when all the hype dies down. But then the hype got too big, I would say. And I took about a week to watch it because I don't love binging. But I really enjoyed it. Definitely a good week.
Yeah, I am a simple man. I represent the everyday American, good old Midwestern type, and I just saw much hype about it on the internet, knew absolutely nothing about it. And I was like, you know what? Let me give this a shot. 100% thought that it was going to be British based in some way, shape, or form. Turns out it was not. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I watched it all in about 3 days or so. And it was a very good time.
I think the conversation about binging, it's been talked about a lot, but it's a show that I think works really well for binging. It's a delightful show, but I think the word that I've used a lot is like, it's delicious. I wanted to watch more of it. The scenery, the set dressing, the costumes, all of it, it's just really appetizing and you want to keep watching it. So I think that is part of the reason why it was so successful, because if it was a week-to-week thing, if you were watching this on FX or AMC or CBS or NBC and Fox or whatever, if you're watching it week to week, ultimately it's a show about chess. And they do their best to make the show a really sexy show about chess. But still, it's a show about chess. So you might lose some people with that week-to-week sort of old way of watching TV.
Well, also, it's not surprising to hear that this project, based off a book, was a long time screenplay and like a movie, because it does feel like a 7-hour movie in a lot of ways. Like the introduction would have just been the first episode. You know what I mean?
Let's talk about that for a second, because it was not originally, I think there's been a lot of iterations of this, but the most recent one that got a lot of steam was going to be Heath Ledger's directorial debut, which he was also going to co-star in, which also, we talked about this off mic. I don't know who he would have played, probably Benny, but that's a whole nother thing to think about. I'm curious how that would have turned out. He probably would have been a really good director, but ultimately I'm really glad it ended up in the hands of Scott Frank, who we'll talk about shortly hereafter.
I mean, I would have loved to see what Heath Ledger's career would have become, and I think this would have just been like a stepping stone for that, really. But as it is now, I'm really happy with the Queen's Gambit we got.
Seeing Heath Ledger in that black trench coat and that hat would have been very fun.
He would have put on some Southern twang, probably, too.
Yeah.
He could have also played Borgov or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, because the original Beth Harmon was going to be played by Elliot Page. So I think like the age gap there might have been also kind of strange with Benny, but
maybe he would have been the old Russian guy with the crazy hair.
That guy's my favorite character in the whole series.
Top 5, no question. So it was going to be a Heath Ledger movie, but it ends up going to Scott Frank. Scott Frank is somebody that you probably hadn't heard of before this show, but you would know of his work because he's been sort of like a Hollywood pro for a long time. He's written a lot of big projects and rewritten a lot of big projects. He did the show Godless, which was the Jeff Daniels Western that's also on Netflix. And so he was able to take the momentum that he got from doing that show and finally put together this show because he had read the book a long, long time ago and had always wanted to do it. So I just kind of wanted to shout out Scott Frank because it's so masterfully written and directed. He writes and directs all 7 episodes of this show, and he's the co-creator and he's the singular voice, the auteur force behind the show. And it's so well kept together. Like, I think when people talk about what makes a good director, they kind of mistakenly talk about other things that usually aren't the director's responsibility. Ultimately, the director is in charge of the performances and then aggregating a group of people to do jobs. So it's his job to find the best possible set designer. And he did that. And he found the best possible actors and got the best performances out of them. So I think just the way that he put the show together is really well done, really masterful. So I just wanted to talk about him and what your thoughts were about the direction of the show and all the pieces that he helped put together.
One of my favorite things that they did with the show is how they utilized chess throughout it, because it is a show about chess, but also chess is more so in, I think, like a vehicle that they use to have these big climactic events in it that make something that doesn't seem very intense extremely high stakes and extremely just like intense, even though I just said that word. But like when I think of chess, typically I think of it as like a very like calm, quiet, soothing activity. But on this, it is so like the stakes are so high, and it's very climactic every single time they're playing.
It doesn't feel like anything else I've seen, particularly like the music choices and obviously the costumes and everything. But Scott Frank really just pulled this whole thing together nicely, and it is one vision, and it really does feel like a 7-hour movie.
Totally. I think what's really impressive to me about the show is how seamless everything is. There's never a shot that feels out of place. There's never a moment in the show that I'm like, oh, that was jarringly weird. Everything flows, and that's also why it's so bingeable, is because it just naturally moves at a pace that it wants to go at. And I think, again, that just speaks to the skill of Scott Frank. Now let's talk about a couple of the standout performances from the show. Obviously, it's Anya Taylor-Joy's star-making performance and a vehicle for her to just absolutely take over the world. We'll have plenty of time to talk about Anya Taylor-Joy, so let's talk about some of the other people. Who are some standouts for you guys?
I'll just start out with this standout just because he was in the first episode mainly. I think Bill Camp as Mr. Scheibel really stood out to me. He doesn't, we talked about this off mic, he doesn't do a lot with his face or anything, but he's such an interesting presence in Beth's life. And once we get to episode 7, we'll talk about this, but their relationship might have been the most impactful for me, as like a pseudo father figure to her, as someone in many ways who is her father figure in the whole thing, but he doesn't say a lot. He doesn't really do a lot besides teach her how to play chess and then just get owned by her constantly. But he's really good. And it's a standout performance for me for sure.
He was incredible in it, and I found their relationship to be fascinating. And always when you have an older person like that acting alongside a child, I always wonder what that's like, because I am neither a child nor an older person. Fun fact. But like that moment in the first episode when they're getting their picture taken, very compelling to me.
Yeah, what I love is Mr. Scheibel kind of is like him and young Beth are basically like the same person. They're both quiet. They both just do what they're supposed to do, and they both love chess. Like they actually have more in common than you would think that they would. There's this old janitor at a all girls orphanage place, and then here's this young, brilliant, soon to be chess prodigy, and they actually have like a lot in common. And when we get into that last episode, when we find out he's been keeping tabs on her for her whole career, oh my God, it's just
Cue the waterworks.
Oh, God, yeah. But his presence is felt throughout the whole series because of the effect that he has on her chess playing, but also through the editing, which is remarkable in this show as well. Every time Beth loses, and they cut to Mr. Scheibel telling her in that first episode that you have to succumb to the loss. I also think that Marielle Heller, who plays Alma, her adopted mother, is like the big standout for me. We talked about this off mic, but she's mostly known as a director. Hasn't done a ton of acting, but again, the brilliance of Scott Frank is to pull these different pieces together and to make them so seamless and connected. And so he gets this really great performance out of Marielle Heller, and it's a character also that could have gone really wrong. It could have been a very one-dimensional, one-note character that I think is given a lot of humanity throughout the show.
Yeah, no, definitely agreed. I mean, when I was kind of predicting in my head where she was going, I was like, oh, she's going to be like the main villain for the first part of her life, you know? Besides like her drug addiction and then obviously the people at the orphanage and stuff. But no, she is actually like a great partner to Beth, and she's a lot of fun. She also directed A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, which is like a pretty sweet Mr. Rogers biopic starring Tom Hanks. It's nothing really like crazy great, but it's a very solid movie, and I would recommend checking it out. But yeah, she's just a joy to watch. There's something about her performance, and like it makes sense because she's not really an actor, that just feels like very natural.
Yeah, I absolutely thought that she at first was going to be using Beth as like a cash cow just to win all these tournaments to get money, but they actually did develop a truly authentic love for each other, and she really like did fill the void as Beth's mother, and it was very sweet.
She was great in the show. There's a lot of really good standout performances. I'm just going to mention one more, and you guys can rattle off a couple more. We'll obviously talk about all of these actors as we go, episode by episode. But I really loved Harry Melling's performance. He plays Harry Beltic in the show. You'll know him from Harry Potter. He played Dudley. You'll also know him from Buster Scruggs. He plays a man with no arms and no legs. And he's just, he has a compelling face and presence. I was fixated on him the entire time. I think, I mean, I hate to say this sounds kind of mean, but I mean it as like a sincere compliment. He's not like a traditionally attractive Hollywood actor in the same way that like Anya Taylor-Joy kind of is, but he has a truly compelling look, and it's something that's different from other actors that could have gotten this part. Like, for example, the actor who plays Towns is just so hot.
His jawline, god damn.
Wow.
So
you could
hot.
Cut a whole block of cheese with that jawline.
But like, he is like traditionally handsome, and he's also very compelling on the show. But like, having Harry Melling, who is this unique and interesting looking face, it's one, authentic to the chess aspect of it. Like, he looks like a guy who would be a chess master in Kentucky, you know? And he also
he really does.
Yeah, and again, he just is captivating to watch.
I want to shout out one more performance. I thought Moses Ingram as Jolene gave very strong performance. Every single scene that she was in, I was just like captivated by her. Just such a strong presence, I thought.
I also loved how they never like recasted her once she was like younger or older. It is just very interesting to see that the one stable thing in Beth's life in many ways is like her childhood friend. Like, she always looks how she remembers her, you know?
She's a really important character because she kind of grounds the story in a very unique way. She makes the audience and Beth aware of the fact that Beth's hero's journey is only possible because she's white. And that's something that's really interesting and important, because if there was no acknowledgement whatsoever of that dynamic of her being black and Beth being white and the trajectory that Beth gets to have, then you could criticize the show. But instead, they do their best to at least make it a conversation point and to bring it up so that it's not just something that's ignored. It's something that's addressed.
Yeah. And just the last couple people I want to shout out. I thought the twin brothers, Matthew Dennis Lewis and Russell Dennis Lewis, they played Matt and Mike. They annoyed me so much in episode 2, but then similar to her motherly figure in it, Alma, they become like a nice team with Beth, and they're just very... I don't know, their exposition dumps, like always. They're always either teaching Beth about chess or like where they are, what tournament they're at or whatever. But but they're a lot of fun. And I just think it's always cool to get some twin brothers in there. And they grew
like
on me a lot.
They were like the little characters in like a video game where you go up to them and like you click on them and they just tell you like where you are and everything about the place.
Yeah.
I found it very weird that she was taking chess lessons from them because she is very clearly far superior to them at chess. But yeah, strange characters.
Yeah.
The way that all of the male characters in her life show up as somewhat adversaries, and then she beats them, and then she takes them on as like a part of her crew, basically, is really funny. Actually, like it's kind of silly, but it's a show that I'm smiling and giggling the entire time I'm watching it because it's just so awesome, and that speaks to some of the criticism that I do want to talk about. It's been overwhelmingly positive, the reception to the show. It's got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, which means nothing. It's got an 8.7 on IMDb, which also means nothing. And it's got a 4.9 out of 5 on Google reviews, which also means nothing. But the criticism that I've read online is about how it's this fictionalized story where this character of Beth just keeps winning. The criticism is just that she wins too much, she gets too much, and it's not authentic to reality. But my response to that is, we're watching so many shows that are just horribly depressing and authentic to life, where people get murdered and their children have leukemia and just all the worst things that you can do shows about. And those are amazing shows and worth doing shows about. But what I loved about this was I was smiling the whole time. It was a really positive experience. I'm happy that Beth Harmon gets to have a positive experience, and it doesn't have to be about her trauma as much as it is about her success.
2020 has been a sad year. I am happy that we got a show that was relatively happy, even though she definitely did have these demons and these struggles that she was dealing with that almost took her down. It was nice to watch a show where I'm like, oh man, no one died.
Well,
everything works out in the end. I was happy everything just worked out in the end.
I think there's never been a better year for a show like that. And I think in a different year, I'm curious what the reception would have been to the show. But in this year, which is the only year that we're going to get The Queen's Gambit, I was really happy that it was a mostly happy story.
She also does lose like a good amount, whether it's like Benny in the... I think it's episode 4 at the in Cincinnati. I think she loses to him, and she loses to Borgoff twice. And at the end, she only beats him because obviously because she like looks at the ceiling and does all this stuff. But also she's playing white at the end, and like someone said it early on where it's like, oh, if you're playing white, you go first. And like Borgoff has never lost when he goes first, and he still doesn't at the end. But yeah, that's the thing. Like she does lose a lot, and she has a lot of demons, like you were talking about with the drugs and stuff. And all of her relationships, especially with Harry and Benny, are also really interesting, which I can't wait to talk about because that really was impactful with just her sexuality in general and just how this series dealt with it. But I definitely think she deals with problems.
The last thing I want to talk about, then we'll go episode by episode and talk about a whole bunch of good stuff. Real quick, let's just talk about Anya Taylor-Joy. How much did you know of her? Tyler, you already mentioned you saw her in Thoroughbreds and Split. Jack, how well did you know Anya Taylor-Joy coming into this, and how impressed were you by the end of it?
Oh, I knew nothing about this woman before I saw her, and now I think she's incredible. Just owned every scene she was in. so much fun to watch.
It's so hard to carry a show, to carry a movie, which is 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours. That's tough. But to carry 7 hours is the whole show rests on her face. There are so many tight close-ups of just her face. And if it doesn't bring everything that she has, this show doesn't work at all. She'll definitely be nominated. And she should win, I think. I can't think of the other nominees off the top of my head. Maybe somebody might be more deserving. So I just wanted to bring it up because it's a harder balancing act than I think it's actually going to get credit for. I think everyone's going to acknowledge, and she'll probably be awarded for the performance, but I think it's even harder than we're giving it credit for.
Yeah, and I love some of the little moments and little things she did. Like, there were multiple times throughout the series, like when she was playing chess and her back was up against the wall and she like puts her hands on the back of her neck and stuff, and you can just physically feel the stress that she is going through internally. And I thought it was just a truly magical performance.
Yeah, and especially at her age, because she must have been like 23, 22 when she was filming this, and it's an incredibly impressive performance. And even some young actors who have been nominated for Oscars and are great in other things couldn't carry something like this on their shoulders. Like, I think a good example of this is King on Netflix. Love Timothée Chalamet in Call Me By Your Name, but in King, where he's playing this young guy who's going to eventually become the king of this place, and he just doesn't, it might be the writing or his performance, but he just like doesn't carry it as much as Anya Taylor-Joy does in this movie.
It's a star-making performance, and I hope to see her in a lot more things after this. She could be the lead in a million indie movies that get nominated for Oscars. She could also be the lead in the next Star Wars movie, and I think that speaks to her range as well. Okay, then let's start with episode 1. Throughout the whole series, we're jumping back in time with these flash forwards and then flashbacks to her mother and her mother's mental illness. And in episode 1, we start off with the flash forward in Paris with the Borgov match. She wakes up, and immediately from the get-go, you're like, okay, this is not going to be easy for Beth Harmon. This is going to be about the rise and fall and rise of Beth Harmon. We then go back in time to the car crash that leaves her orphaned, and she goes into this Methuen school for girls, and she meets Jolene. She meets this headmistress that's kind of a little bit intense. She learns about these magical pills that are just ridiculous. She takes one and gets high, and then she runs into Mr. Scheibel. At night, she dreams of her mom and her dad, and we learn that her mom had a PhD in mathematics from Cornell, but something horrible happened, and we don't quite know what's happening there. We're also learning that she's super good at her schoolwork because she's in class and she finishes before everyone else, and all of that is really dense. All of it is leading to this moment where she meets Mr. Scheibel. I think it's interesting how well the show handles those first 10 minutes, because I think that's about the first 10, 15 minutes or so of the show. Already we know what the story is going to be about. We know that she has been orphaned. We know that she's kind of an awkward character. She's this introverted genius character. She takes these pills, and she's going to be dealing with this sort of drug addiction for the remainder of the show. So like the economy of story is really impressive through these first 10-ish minutes. Any thoughts on just the beginning of the first episode?
Yeah, this hooked me right away. I think something super important in making anything is the first 10 minutes. 1, showing you all you need to know, and 2, really getting you invested. I think I woke up at like 7 or something. I was like, all right, I'm just going to start watching it this morning, and hopefully I like it. And then the first 10 minutes just hooked me immediately, literally up until the end of the episode. And I think it just really summarizes everything you need to know about Beth Harmon really well. And it's just fantastic storytelling, really. Also, huge shout out to Isla Johnston. I think she does a great job as a young Beth Harmon. But it's really nice that this episode called Openings is just this self-contained thing. You just learn everything you need to know about Beth, and it's really nice.
Yeah, and I really like the tool of using the flash forward at the beginning to set up this long flashback we'll have for the next several episodes of seeing where we're going in the story and then how we got there. Really interesting origin story going on.
Well, I guess I'll jump into some more of what happens in this episode, and I'm going to be a bit more. I'm going to follow the notes a little bit more for these first 2 episodes because I think it's so dense what happens in these first couple of episodes, and then it's sort of like most shows that are about 7 hours or longer. It starts to sort of thin out a little bit. But so she meets Mr. Scheibel. She goes down into the basement. She sees the chessboard for the first time, and immediately, it's just this like Heaven's Gate opening moment where she sees her whole future in front of her. She has no idea what it is, but she loves it. And then at night, she starts dreaming about the chessboard on the ceiling, which when it first shows up, I was like, oh, that's brilliant, because as this show explains, she plays based more on intuition. While she is well studied, she's basically just a genius, and this is the most clever way of visualizing what that thought process looks like. Then, throughout the rest of this episode, she's taking more pills. She's hanging out with Jolene. She's learning things from Jolene and from the other people in the school. She is learning how to play chess with Mr. Scheibel, and he's kind of curmudgeon-y and grumpy at first, but he slowly begins to open up to her as well. And he very quickly sees that she has a real talent. And so he brings in this guy from the local high school to come in and check her skill, and she immediately pwns his ass. And so he's like, come to the high school. And then one of my favorite scenes in the entire episode is when she goes to the high school and she just pwns everybody. It's incredible.
Yeah.
By the end of the episode, the drug addiction is really bad. She's like, she needs it in order to visualize the board up on the ceiling. Otherwise, she has trouble with it. So it becomes a dependent thing that she thinks in her mind she needs in order to become better at chess. And she is becoming better at chess, so she really believes that that's the reason that she's so good at it. Other things that are happening in this episode, she's kind of learning about sexuality in these very strange ways, because she doesn't have a male role model other than Mr. Scheibel. She doesn't have parents to explain the birds and the bees. So she hears Jolene say cocksucker and asks her what that means, and gets a very simple understanding of what that means. And she's seeing boys and girls kissing at the school across the street. And so early on, we're learning that this is going to also be about her sexuality as the show goes on. She breaks into the pill area because the pills have now been, they're not allowed to give out the pills, which one of my favorite moments in the episode is when Mr. Ferguson is like, yeah, we can't give them to you guys. Who would have guessed? Horse tranquilizers for children is bad.
Laughed so hard when that happened.
Yeah. But she breaks in, she gets the pills, takes a huge handful, passes out. So very dense first episode, but it sets up 3 really important things. It sets up, 1, her genius level intellect and love for chess. 2, it sets up the aspect of the show, which is about her sexuality and her learning about her sexuality. And then the third thing is, I think it so cleverly articulates, and as it goes along, it continues to cleverly articulate how easy it is to, how drug addiction really manifests from childhood trauma. So just in this first episode, I mean, it's so dense. And then on top of that, there's also really lovely, fun stuff, like just the Mr. Scheibel elements of it, and how Beth is eating those chocolates after she pwns all those boys. And she's like, you can have the rest of the chocolates. So there's a bunch of stuff to talk about in this episode. What are things that jumped out to you?
It really is kind of a near perfect introductory to the whole series. You get we figure out everything we need to know in that first episode there. And I will just say the final scene of that, with her taking an almost comical amount of pills from that jar, and then the last shot of her just falling off the stool and the jar shattering on the ground, was brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, it's really funny because as a 9-year-old who doesn't know any better, I think all of us would take as many of those pills as we could, like if we got those results back, you know. Overall, yeah, very solid episode, and I'm like kind of sick of origin stories just in general, but this is a good way of doing an origin story effectively, definitely. And I'm glad they don't stay at the orphanage too long.
That's a very good point. I think the reason that it resonates with me so strongly, and because I felt the same way at the beginning of the episode, when we flash back to her going to the Methuen School for Girls, I'm like, oh, okay, I hope this is like 10, 15 minutes tops, just because, like, whatever. We've been down this road. We've seen 1,000 origin stories for characters, and what's
because her mom also dies in a car accident, and I'm like, ugh. Like, I've seen it. Yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, it's like, it's really hardcore tragic to start the episode. And you're kind of primed because of the shows that we've been watching for years now that are, like I mentioned, that are just horrific and sad. You're primed to think that it's going to get worse, but it doesn't. It actually gets better when she meets Mr. Scheibel. He's set up sort of creepy, and he's like living in the basement. And then when they actually meet and then they start playing chess, it's this totally warm and like sort of unfamiliar experience just from the training that I've had of watching these horrific dramas.
I've never seen a janitor who lives in the basement end up being the good guy.
Exactly. It's usually like Freddy Krueger, you know, it's not Mr. Scheibel most of the time. But yeah, to the point about the origin story, the reason I think it works so well is because I think it better than anything I've seen, it really does show you what childhood trauma can do and how it can latch on and how it affects a person going forward. Beth is deeply troubled by the death of her mom and by the situation getting thrown into this school for girls. And the drug addiction starts early. And as the show progresses, you really buy into her drug addiction. Sometimes in a show, like they make a character a drug addict or an alcoholic, and it just seems like it's a hat at a certain point. It's just it's sort of trendier to make a character like a brooding artist that's an alcoholic. It's much harder to actually do a real deep exploration as to why that drug addiction starts and how it's based in your childhood trauma. And so that's why it works as an origin story, is because it's actually doing real origin story work.
And with that, I think we can move on to episode 2, Exchanges.
Yeah.
Unless there's anything else.
Just that Mr. Scheibel rules. That's all.
Yeah. Mr. Scheibel's awesome. Shout out to him. He's definitely in the... I was going to make up a category of characters. He's in our favorite guys we put on the shelf.
He's in the Elf on the Shelf.
On the shelf.
You heard
Is
of
that
Elf
like
on
the
the
new
Shelf?
Elf on the Shelf?
It's Nothing Notable's shelf. Not like, it's kind of Elf on the Shelf. Like, we have Elf on the Shelf there. We have Mike Milligan from Fargo on there. And now we have Mr. Scheibel. It's only growing as we continue on. Also,
One
Zombie.
might say we're going to need a bigger shelf.
Exactly. Zombie Man, definitely on there also. Sorry.
For sure.
Sorry, gotta shout him out. You could probably
Good.
cut
Now
that.
we can put Fargo in the title to continue getting those Fargo clicks.
All right.
All right, so episode 2. The big things that happen in episode 2. We get the first like few minutes are with young Beth again, and then she really gracefully and skillfully transforms into Anya Taylor-Joy Beth. I thought it was like a really successfully done like time skip. Alma shows up at the school, and she's clearly way more into the idea of adopting this child than her husband is. All her husband says in the meeting is like, they call you Beth, or they call you Betty, or something like that. And it's just like, ugh, what? What a weirdo. He's very despondent and not interested. He's a total dick from the get-go.
Fuck that guy.
Yeah, that guy
Yes,
sucks.
fuck them.
And so she gets adopted, and immediately Jolene is really mad. She's kind of mad. She also makes it clear again, like, you're adoptable and I'm not, and it's because of the colors of our skin. And so it's just something that the show makes mention of fairly often, which is important, I think. So she goes to her new home. She's amazed by like, is this really my room? Is this whole thing mine? Like that's my own bed. And so it's sweet. She's slow to become like emotionally invested in Alma, but it starts to happen as the episode goes along. Again, Alma just seems like so jazzed to have her. And she has this awful, loveless marriage. And you can tell so quickly that like this marriage is just not going to last because he sucks and is keeping her in a cage, basically. And that's something I think that I have such a soft spot for in movies is the housewife character, because there's there's many generations of women that didn't get to do what they wanted to do, but I think just because it's so close, I guess I can identify with it more. But like Alma could have been so much more in a different life, and so it's just really sad, and it also makes sense why she has trouble with alcohol and all of the things that she's dealing with. She goes to high school. They go shopping in the cheap section of the store. She steals that magazine from the store, the chess review magazine. We learn that the dad is detained out west and he's not coming back, which is good because I didn't want him to come back. Screw you, Dad.
Fuck that He's guy. Just out there sending money.
Yeah. Beth reveals that she wants to go play tournaments, and so she writes to Mr. Scheibel and asks, like, hey, if you give me some money, I promise I'll give you $10. Or how whatever I win, I'll give you a portion of the money. Alma gets sick, and so she's like, hey, can you go pick up my prescription from the store? And Beth, who has had this horrific drug addiction past, is like, yeah, I'll go pick it up. And now she's able to start taking pills from Alma. Again, it's a really clever way of talking about this, it's a brilliant way of showing what drug addiction really looks like. It's sneaking stuff. Even though you think you're functional, like you're really not. Then she gets the money from Mr. Scheibel. She goes to the tournament. I love that first scene with the twins where they're like, what's your rating? And she's like, I don't have a rating. Well, you can't play in the tournament if you don't have a rating. And then she finagles her way in there and they're like, you're going to lose. And Beltic might show up. And so then at the tournament, she learns, and we learn a lot about chess. I think the show does a really good job of, without beating you over the head, teaching you how to play chess. And they do that in this episode also. She asks, like, I don't understand what the clock is for. And the girl that she plays is like, oh, you use the clock this way. And then the pen and paper is to write down your moves. Small stuff like that. They just...
Could you imagine knowing that? And you're like, oh, I'm going to beat this person so bad. And they beat you in like 4 moves. You're like, they didn't know how to use the clock.
Yeah. That's got to be someone's move where they just get you off guard right from the start. Like, what does this piece do here?
Yeah. She also meets Towns at the tournament. And Towns is this
jawline guy.
Oh, he's just so hot. And she's like, oh my goodness. DL Towns. She also has her first period at the tournament, which is a really sweet scene. She freaks out. She goes into the bathroom. She doesn't know what's going on. It's like the scene from Carrie. It's like a horror show for her because she doesn't know what's going on. Nobody's taught her about this. And the girl that she was playing, she helps her out and she gives her a tampon or a pad. And I thought that was a really sweet scene. She goes on, she plays other people. She plays Towns, she beats Towns, then she plays Beltic. And Beltic is like got these horrible teeth and he's yawning and
oh man, those teeth, man.
Oh man.
Those goddamn teeth.
and she beats him. She wins. She wins the Kentucky State Championship. And then she goes back home. Alma learns that there's a bunch of money in chess, and so she's like, I'm in. So that's episode 2. Talk to me about it.
It is a fun coincidence that obviously, I always hate when people are like, movies need to be realistic. And I don't think they do, because I feel like that's a very unrealistic like thing. Like the drug she was addicted to, like Alma just so happens to be like have a prescription for. But that's also just good writing, just in general. Like it's a very interesting way to make it easier for her to get something that makes her better. This episode also does a good job of just introducing stuff that will come back later. Like just small characters. Like Harry is a pretty small character, but also the twins, but also the convenience store guy. He has like a nice little scene at the end of it all where he's like, I knew you were doing all that back then. And it's like, oh, that's weird, but also just fun that he's back. But yeah, and it's just a very, very solid second episode. Gets you engaged. I'm happy she's not in high school for much longer. That is also something this show does well. It just keeps moving through her life at at a pace that isn't like breakneck, but it also is like, this isn't the important stuff. This is just showing you what she's doing at this point. And I think that this is a great episode for all of that.
It does a really great job of expanding on the nuggets that they laid in the first episode, all the seeds that they planted early on. We see her just natural prodiginess in chess, of her just walking in, being an absolute rookie, but just her mind is so much more she just sees the game in a way that these other people don't. And even without the experience of them, she's just able to beat them all. We see her development as a woman and her sexuality. And then we also see the scenes of her drug addiction continue to expand, with her pretending that the prescription bottles are only half filled nowadays, and her surrogate mother being just so out of it that she doesn't even like put the pieces together at all.
Yeah, it's really sad because that Alma is struggling through things as well, and now Beth is like lying to her, and she's still functional. That's so important. It's that she's not like slurring and falling down the stairs. Like, she's completely functional, and she is like still successful at chess, and she thinks that this drug is helping her. That's so important. It's not like not every drug addict is like, falling over, slurring their speech. Not in the beginning anyway. I think this episode is when I got on board with the idea of watching chess. I figured she was going to win the tournament, but I thought once she got to Beltic, she was going to have her first loss. But no, she's just this incredible genius, and she beats him. And
they hype up every one of her competitors very well in this episode, especially Beltic. Beltic's like, they just keep saying his name, and then just looking back on it too, it's just so funny to think like Harry Beltic was the main competitor in episode 2, because you're like, wow, he's really like nothing by the end of it.
He's a grocery store clerk.
Yeah.
Melling's performance is great as Beltic in this episode, and he's very intimidating, but especially it's a recurring thing, like important and like kind people in the chess game in this universe always are like okay with losing, and Beltic, like, you think he would be really angry at the end, but no, he like shakes her hand and like smiles, and it's really sweet.
I love referring to people by just their last name too. I feel like it makes them seem greater than they actually are.
Yeah, because by the end of the series, it's just Harry, the grocery store clerk. But when you talk about him as like Beltic, the guy who won the state championship, it's like, wow, this guy's like a big deal. To your point, Tyler, yeah, they make every match seem harder than the one before it, which is really impressive. I don't know how they accomplish that, but sure enough, they do. Even though most of the time, Beth doesn't, it's not that much harder for Beth each time.
It's little things, like when Towns says like, oh, you just need to, or the young woman's like, you just need to circle your name and put it in the thing when you're done. And she does that. And then immediately after she finishes, which she finishes pretty fast, Towns comes in, and you're like, oh, Towns is like also good because he finished just in the same time. And then again, it's little things like this. It's like, then he circles her name when she beats him. And it's just great. It's just a great little ladder that she slowly climbs this episode.
Moving on to episode 3. Episode 3 starts off with a mom flashback where they're at the lake, and she thinks that like the dynamic between her and her birth mother is really, it's you can see why it's so troubling for her, because her mom is dealing with mental health issues and suicidal thoughts. And so in this flashback at the lake, she dives under, and then she's under for a long time, and Beth is just waiting there because she's a child. She's just waiting on the shore, like, where is my mom? And she doesn't pop up. And then she pops up, and it's just, those are little things that, if you're a child, are really scary. And so it's just, the show does such a good job of making you understand Beth Harmon. So then we jump forward back into the regular timeline. Alma and Beth, they're arriving at a hotel for a chess tournament, and she runs into Benny for the first time. We meet Benny, and he's just he's not even in the tournament. He's just showing someone like a thing on a chessboard. He's like, check this out. And so she kind of just walks up, doesn't even really talk to him, just kind of sees his presence. Like you mentioned in the last episode, these characters just sort of show up in small bursts and then become much bigger later on. Then she also runs into the twins again, which, to your point, Jack, every time they show up, it's like, oh, your magical friends are here. Like, this is fun. Alma is just having a ball. She's just loving her time here at the hotel. She's just like, she's drinking, she's having fun, she's giggling, she's watching the TV. Then Beth wins the tournament, and Alma asks her, like, hey, as like an agent fee, like, what if I take 10%? And that's a moment where you think, uh-oh, this is where she becomes the villain, right? Like, this is where the descent happens. But then Beth says, no, how about 15%? So, like, they're a team. You know, it could have gone toxic, but it doesn't. Even though there's still some struggles there. Then there's a little montage of the travel to other tournaments and Alma calling in and saying, like, Beth is sick and it's the worst flu that she's ever seen and she's going to have to miss a couple more days of school. Really,
she's got mono.
Yeah, it's really sweet, sort of endearing things. And it reminded me of when I was a child also. Like, I never liked missing school, but every now and then my mom would be like, you should just take the day off. And I'd be like, can you do that? And she's like, yeah, like, let's just go to the movies or something. And then she'd call in and, like, he's got a fever. Like, it's a very sweet thing, I think, in the show. Then later in the episode, Beth also goes to a little party with the girl that she had seen, the girl that's been, like, really mean to her in school. And one of my favorite scenes also is when all the girls are like, oh my God, I love this song, turn it up. And they start singing and dancing. And Beth is just like, what is going on right now? and then she goes to leave, but then she sees that there's a bunch of alcohol there. And so she snags some. Then we go to Las Vegas and we run into towns again. And it's like, ooh, here we go. This is the big love affair of the series. They're going to be a thing. Then they go up to his bedroom and things are getting a little bit hot and heavy. He's got this incredible jawline. She's got these doll eyes. Like, what's going to happen? And then this guy comes in. I don't know. I thought this was a fun little thing. It's interesting for Beth's growing sexuality also, that she has this unrequited love for this guy who is either bisexual or gay. And she gets pissed and she's like, all right, I'm out of here. Then she has the match against Benny, and they end up as co-champions of the event, and that's episode 3.
Yeah, just on Benny, just for a moment, she does lose that, right? But if she like tied, she would have just won by herself. But because he beat her, they're co-champions, which is, I think, pretty interesting, and definitely, I think it's definitely necessary for Beth to lose something, but not really at the same time. Like, she still wins the US Open, but again, it's co-champions with someone introduced in this episode that she can't stand. She really can't stand Benny, because Benny's cocky. He's like cool. He's pretty much like, for chess, you know.
Yeah.
He's pretty much like,
for chess. He's pretty cool.
He's basically just like sicker Beth in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like, Beth wants this popularity and stuff, and I feel like Benny was always kind of cool. At least that's how I gain it. Like, in high school and stuff, yeah, he was good at chess, but he's good in social settings. They show that a bunch. Like, he's always talking to someone. He's always explaining stuff, and he's always studying. And he's really like Beth in a lot of ways, except, like, he's what Beth eventually, like, wants to be, you know, in some ways. And I think that's an incredibly interesting villain to have, and really good, just in general.
He has the most insane wardrobe also.
Hell yeah.
That black leather trench coat and the goddamn hat was just next level, something else.
Yeah. And on the town stuff too, I love that so much. I think this series does a decent job on, like, just like queerness and stuff in general. Sometimes I wish they kind of dove into it more, but especially for something that takes place in the 60s, you know, I think this is the type of queer stories you can tell. Like, again, I kind of wish and we'll talk about her relationship with Cleo eventually. Like, I kind of wish they dove into stuff more. A lot of the time with the queer stuff that they're handling in this, it's very vague, and not to piss off like certain demographics, I can imagine. And again, I think if this came out 10 years or so, like, they would dive into it more. But it is cool that it's in there. I just wish they went a little further with some of the stuff, is all I'm saying.
The one part of that scene that was weird for me is, isn't she like 15?
Yeah, the age thing is tough, because the show goes, like you said, Tyler, at a fast pace, and you kind of just assume like, oh, okay, we're in high school, now we're out of high school, and then it's like, whoa, wait, no, now she's still, how old is he? Like, you start asking questions.
Exactly. Like, it looks like he's in his 30s.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was like 20, 21 when they first met, and she's like 15, 16. But as I was saying, like, it goes super fast. So she was 15 like 20 minutes ago. It's kind of like that thing in Revenge of the Sith where Anakin was 100% a good guy 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
But then 10 minutes later, he's just like, he's pulling a Holocaust, just like in the Jedi Temple. It's crazy.
Pulling a Holocaust.
It's a genocide. It's horrible.
I just want to address your point, Tyler, about the way that it kind of halfway goes queer in some areas. I think, I totally agree. I think the stuff with Cleo, while I'm watching it, I'm like, you need to expand this. We'll talk about this later, of course, but you need to expand this, or you need to cut it. The problem with cutting it is then you're cutting a queer story. So let's expand it. And then same thing with Towns. Like, let's directly address his sexuality, and they kind of do, but they kind of don't. It's sort of Disney at the end of Star Wars.
At the end, he's like, I was confused.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you could say, like, if someone's not paying attention, they wouldn't even know,
Right.
Which is always just, I think, is a bummer. But again, we'll talk about it more when we get to Cleo and stuff like that.
Episode 4 starts off, Beth is taking Russian classes at the community college. And that's cool. I like that. That's a great little thing it makes sense for Beth, who is a super genius, to be like, in order to become the greatest chess player of all time, I'm going to have to learn Russian, because all the greatest chess players are Russian. After class, she goes home with this boy that's from the class, and then they hang out at his place. They're drinking, they're smoking. There's a penis candle in his bedroom. I was like, what? Okay. But she calls home to Alma, and she's like, hey, I'm gonna party with some college boys. And she's like, are you partying with college boys? And she's like, yeah, I'm partying with college boys. And Alma's like, okay, I'm fine with you partying with college boys. It's respectful. Like, I think the fact that Alma is Beth's adoptive mother, she never puts too tight of a leash on Beth. She knows that she can't control her. She already came into her life as like almost, as a teenager. I thought that was very respectful of Alma to be like, okay. And then Beth has sex for the first time, and it's not very good. She's like, how much longer is this? And then she like gives him a little pat on the shoulder afterwards, which I read an interview where Anya Taylor-Joy is like, I added the pat. I thought that was in the character.
I always love hearing those slight, like, improvised movements from actors who are like, I just felt it was cool, so I just wanted to say I did that. And it's like, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And so when she wakes up, they're all gone, and they're like, hey, we're gonna go see a movie if you want to go see a movie. And so she drinks and she dances and she just has fun. She gets to kind of be like an adult and like do her own thing for the first time. And so she's just having a whale of a time. Then Alma and Beth go to Mexico City, and this is the Mexico City episode where so much happens. She reveals on the plane, Alma does, that she has like a pen pal that she was keeping in contact with while she was married with this guy that lives in Mexico City, and that she is just so
Mexican
stoked.
pen pal.
Yeah. She's just so stoked to go meet this guy. And again, what a great performance by Marielle Heller. You really buy how excited she is on that plane. She's just like swooning, and Beth is like, okay, that's cool, I'm trying to play chess. And then she like holds her hand. It's just really cute. Again, Beth runs into the twins. How cool. Alma goes on like her little dates with the pen pal guy, and Beth kind of has to tag along, and she doesn't really want to, but she's being like a good daughter and being supportive of Alma in her little budding relationship. So then next up, she plays the little Russian boy.
Oh man,
this kid. I wanted to just shout him out. It's Louis Ashburn Circus is the actor who plays the kid. He was great. I loved him. He ends up being the most formidable opponent that Beth has played to this point, and they have a super long match. Well, she ends up finishing this match, and she beats the little Russian kid, and the little Russian kid is like, "Do they have movies in America? Do they have drive-ins in America?" And so she does a really gracious thing also by saying, like, "You're the best I've ever played," at the end of that match. So
not until you play Borgov.
Exactly. Yeah.
So good.
Until you play Borgov. That's great. She has this awesome scene in the elevator also. Beginning of the episode, she was learning how to speak Russian. Came in handy because Borgov and two other Russians, they are in the elevator talking about Beth. And I think that this is important too, because Borgov is the bad guy. He's the villain, but he's never villainized necessarily. He's just really good at chess. They never turn him into an evil Soviet monster. He's just kind of quiet and a little cold, a little calculated, but he has some sort of positive things to say about Beth. He says, like, she's an orphan, she'll do whatever it takes, just like us. So there's a kinship there and a similarity there. Then she goes and plays Borgov. And this is a big moment. And she loses. So she loses to Borgov. And it's not like she's a co-champion with Benny kind of thing. It's like she just loses. And this is what she'd been working towards. And who knows if you'll ever get this opportunity again to play someone as good as Borgov. And he annihilates her. Like he makes her feel like a kid that doesn't know what she's doing. And it's just a mess for Beth Harmon. She goes back to the hotel room and she's telling Alma all about the match. She's like, I can't believe how terrible this was. She's getting changed and she just keeps talking about how bad the match was. And then she realizes Alma is dead. Right after that, she has a phone call with Bad Dad.
Bad Dad.
Yeah, not Rad Dad. He's Bad Dad. And he's like, here's what you got to do, I guess. She's got like a plot somewhere. You could bury her there. You could stay at the house if you want. I don't want anything to do with this. he sucks.
He's a rotten person.
That's episode 4. So the Mexico City episode, a lot of stuff happens. It's really a big bad episode for Beth Harmon.
Yeah, it's kind of the no good, very, very bad day for Beth Harmon in this episode. And, you know, it being called Middle Game, I think it's super important to have your protagonist like lose a lot. And she really does in this episode. And in the span of 10 minutes, I will say she probably loses like everything important to her at that point, which again, I wrote in my notes, it's a little on the nose, but it's super informative. And it also just shows how her life is like crumbling before her just after this loss. But I think it's super important to let Alma know, but also the audience know like how Borgov made her feel, you know, because essentially Beth Harmon got a taste of her own medicine. Like forever, she was like beating everyone just like very easily. But with this small kid and with Borgov, more or less, like Borgov, like the kid and her were like equals, you know, but with Borgov, it's like she was played like a fiddle because he's just so good. And it really sets up their next match really well, which again starts off the whole show, but it's like the fact that she's hungover in her next match and she's playing Borgov is super intense because she loses this match when she's sober. But yeah, this episode's very good, very sad to see Alma go in this episode, but it's totally necessary. You can't keep like a perfect mentor figure around all the time because conflict doesn't breed nicely then. But yeah, a very solid episode. Definitely one of my favorites of the season.
Yeah, it's really the first time that things like really get tough for her in the series. Because before she when she lost to Benny, that was a low point. But this is like what a real low point feels like.
It's common in TV shows, isn't it? Where like there's a standout performance from someone that's just awesome. And you're just like, yes. A comp is like Jamie Foxx in Baby Driver. He's like so awesome. It's like, yeah, that guy rules. He could have his own. Oh shit, he's dead. Like,
He's gone.
spoiler alert. But yeah, it's just someone's just taken over the screen, and I felt that way about Marielle Heller in this series. And so she goes because she has to. Like you said, Tyler, narratively, you got to kill. I say this all the time, but you got to kill Dumbledore, otherwise Harry can't become Harry. You know,
Totally. No, you have to kill Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi so Rey can rise. Different, but still,
And you got to kill Obi-Wan. You got to kill Obi-Wan also in episode 4.
Yeah.
You just got to do it.
We talk about this all the time. We said it a lot in our Fargo podcast. It's always nice to not see a cliched death scene. She just dies. She just stops breathing.
Well, and she's like all alone now. She doesn't have anyone in her corner at this point.
Yeah. Just wait though.
Just wait.
Which is, that's also one of my few criticisms of the show. It's not so much a criticism as much as it is just like that's a bit convenient, is whenever she needs help, it appears. It's sort of like, it feels, again, to reference Harry Potter, just like someone shows up for Harry whenever he needs somebody to help him.
There's some magical fairy godmothers coming in whenever she needs help.
Yeah.
And that happens at the end of this episode too. Like she just gets she randomly gets a phone call from her estranged father now, who was married to Alma, and he's like, yeah, here's what you do with the body. And then at the end of the episode, like you said, Tyler, the guy is just like, if you need drugs, I can help you. And then in the next episode 5, we get a little mom flashback to start it off, but then she goes home, and then out of nowhere, Beltic calls. Like she doesn't even have the opportunity to address her feelings or be alone with herself. Beltic just calls, and he's like, hey, we haven't seen each other in years probably, but but I'm going to be in town, and I'd love to just play some chess. And so then it sort of stunts her ability to emotionally handle or to deal with all the stuff that's just happened. And we get a fun little Harry Beltic and Beth Harmon episode. They just practice a bunch of chess, and very quickly, right when he gets to the house, actually. And this happens a lot in the series, and I hate it in most movies, and it was still sort of upsetting in this one. All of the male characters in her life, when they met her very young, and then they meet her when she's a little older, and they're always like, my, how you've grown. And it's always gross. But
Totally.
Beltic does that too. When he shows up at the house, he's just like, wow, so you look hot.
Yeah, he's got new teeth too.
And he has that car with the flames on it.
Yeah, he's so rad. Harry Beltic rules.
He moves into her house.
Yeah, he just moves in, and they start practicing, and then he has that scene in the bathroom where she's dancing, and he's like, I'm so stupid, I'm so dumb, oh my god, she's so much cooler than me. And everyone's like, we know.
Yeah, get out of there, man. And then he takes I assumed he took the tranquilizer, and then came back and was like, whoa, shit.
That is important though. He finds out about the tranquilizer.
Yeah.
The horse tranquilizer.
Oh my goodness.
And so then they're practicing, and things get a little hot and heavy, and then they have sex. And again, they cut to after the sex, and Beth is just reading a book and just smoking a cigarette like you do in a 60s movie. And then the camera's pulling back, and she just looks calm and casual. And then as it pulls back further, Beltic is just laying in bed with his hands up on the covers and just staring at her whoa, like a little kid. And she's completely disinterested. It's just, I think this actually speaks to something that is important to me. I usually hate sex scenes in movies. I think most of the time you don't need them because, well, one, it's a lot to ask of your actors to be exposed on a giant screen for ever, basically. And there's a lot of manipulation that can occur there. That's really problematic. And so I don't think you need to show nudity that often unless it's really important to the story or to the themes that you're trying to get across. And in this show, they just cut to the end of the sex scene, and you know what it was by Beth's reaction.
We can figure out what happened.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
We know it was bad.
I personally think in most movies, that's all you have to show. Like, the inciting incident of their, like, discourse or whatever, and then the aftermath. Like, that's the interesting stuff. Like, the interesting stuff isn't, rose petals and you're, like, having sex with her belly button and stuff for 5 minutes. Like, that's not it. It's the reaction to it that's super interesting. And that's what really works in this series.
So then Beth runs into the girl that she was really mean to her in high school, and she's just like, "Hey, I've got a kid now. Yeah, life's pretty crazy, huh?" And Beth's like, "Yeah, totally." She goes back home, and Harry's like, "I'm leaving." And it's only been like it was funny. I thought this whole episode was going to be the Harry Beltic and Beth Harmon like sitcom episode, but instead he's just like, "I'm leaving 20 minutes in. This was fun. But you have a problem. Like, here's your horse tranquilizer. Like, stop doing this." And then he leaves. And that's it for Harry Beltic for a little while. Goes to the tournament, to the U.S. Championship. And Benny is there. And Benny and Beth, they meet again. And here's this formidable opponent that she's lost to, but technically was co-champion with. And now here they are together. Before the big event, before they play each other, they play a bunch of speed chess games at night, which was really fun. He's just like, "I'll bet you $5." And she's like, "Deal." And gets whacked, just ruined.
Every time.
And
so good.
Every single time. Then they play each other. Beth wins. It's really, I love the way that they shoot this particular tournament. It's really fun. Then at the end of the episode, they're drinking at a bar. They're talking about what's going to happen next. And they decide to train together in New York. And the episode weirdly ends also on Benny being like, "By the way, we're not going to have sex." And then it's like Beth's, it's like a Beth sitcom reaction where she's like, "What?" Boing. And then the episode ends. But it's sort of it's sort of 2 episodes in one. We get the Harry and Beth storyline in the first half, and then in the second half we get this tournament with Beth and Benny.
Yeah, it was one of the more disjointed episodes, I think, because of that. A lot going on there, but yeah, definitely 2 different things going on.
Yeah, I think something that this show starts to suffer from a little bit, even though I absolutely love most of the scenes, is that it kind of relies on montages a little too much in the back half. And I think this is the episode that kind of starts that, because we have the speed chess one, but then we also have the tournament, like this the tournament one, which is incredible and it looks awesome, but it's just a little like, well, like, let's just like dive into the characters a little more. Let's like get to know Harry better. Let's do a little of this, but they like focus in on these montages, and that kind of goes for the rest of the series. The next couple episodes have a bunch of like great montages. To my point, it's kind of like they keep doing it, and it's kind of like I kind of want to just keep on Beth. Like let's keep learning more about Beth and like what she thinks of all this, instead of like these constant montages that are really cool but take away a little bit. And I think that adds to this disjointment of an episode. I love all the Benny stuff, and I love all the Harry stuff too. It's like weird and it's awkward. Like when they kiss for the first time, he like went in and she was like, "Oh," like, and he's like, "Oh God, I messed it up." And she's like, "Oh, I just wasn't ready." And then she's like, "Okay, I'm ready now." And it's like it's really sweet. And and again, it just shows like, just what it's like to be like a young person, and like how awkward an encounter like that can be for like both parties. And I just like how that's built up and stuff. And I think the thing that keeps running in the last 2 episodes is like, well, what's Beth gonna do afterwards? Because there's so much to life more than chess. And even oh my God, even in the episode before with like her having sex for the first time and like that whole thing. It's just like showing that there's just way more to life, and Beth's going to experience that, and she can do that while she's also a grandmaster at chess, a grand mega master, as I like to call her, because she's better than a grandmaster. Okay.
If we're making the Heath Ledger 2-hour movie version, most of this is like 5 minutes tops, you know? Like they just cut Beltic out and they make that tournament 5 minutes, you know? But still, really good performance from Harry Melling and a fun episode. Moving on to episode 6. Starts off with a flashback to the mom, and this is one of my favorite quotes, one of my favorite lines from the whole season. Her mom says, "Most men will come around and try to teach you things," and basically just don't listen to them. Like they don't know what they're talking about either. And that's what happens. Yeah, that's what happens this whole season is men come around and try to teach her something, and then she kicks their ass. So then we get Beth and Benny driving to New York. It's a cute little road trip. Then they get to his place. She goes up to the nice looking apartment, and then he's like, no, down here. And he lives in this absolute garbage apartment in like a little basement thing. And he's also got magazines of himself all over the place, which is funny. It's totally Benny. Then, you know, this episode, there's a lot more. There's just a bunch of chess. They're playing chess. They're training for chess. They're talking about Borgov. What do you have to do? Look up this match from this year in order to figure out how to play this hand. And then the two champions come over, and Cleo, the super French lady, show up, and they're like,
most
hey,
French person.
Never been a more French person since Cleo
from 5 to 7.
Yeah. They play a bunch of chess, and the guy, as I mentioned earlier, the guy's just like, "Do you play Problems?" And she's like, "No." And he's like, "Check this one out. You'll love it." And then she does it super fast. Then they play a bunch of speed chess again, and this time she kicks Benny's ass.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. We're learning. While Cleo's there also, she's kind of like very flirtatious and talking about what it's like to be a model. And it all feels a little bit rushed, the Cleo stuff, which is unfortunate, but she makes an impression on Beth nonetheless. Everyone leaves, and then it's just Beth and Benny. Beth is Beth, and she's kind of a little flirtatious, and then Benny's like, "I'm a little bit drunk, I'm gonna go to bed," and then he walks away, and then he comes back, and he's like, "Wait, do you still like my hair?" And then it cuts to, again, after they've had sex, and Beth says, "So that's what it's supposed to feel like." Then immediately Benny's also like, "You should play the Sicilian when you're playing Borgov. That's what you're more comfortable with." And she's like, "What are you? Good night, Benny." She wakes up. She goes to Paris. She's going to stay up for a little while, get to bed early, and then play Borgov in the morning. Biggest match of her life. But then Cleo shows up, and Cleo's like, "I'm downstairs. Come on down." And we all know what's happening. The next morning, which is the morning that we saw in the first episode. And we saw a little bit of a head in the bed, and we didn't know who it was, and it's revealed to be Cleo. And this speaks to your point, Tyler, about how we both wish that they had gone a little bit further with the queer storylines.
Yeah.
But she wakes up, she freaks out, she gets dressed, she goes, and she plays Borgov, and she drinks a ton of water, and then she loses in the biggest match of her life.
She drinks so much water.
Yeah.
Oh, God, so much water.
So hungover. Also, was she in a bathtub? She was in a bathtub,
Yes.
right? Crazy.
Yeah. It got wild. She goes home. She talks with Bad Dad about the house. He just shows up and he's like, "I never said you could have this house." And she's like, "No, you did. Also, I'm like legally your daughter." And he's like, "Stop saying that." And she's just like constantly getting at Bad Dad's like nervousness. And so then she basically buys the house from him. And then that's when she goes on her epic bender. That's when she starts rearranging the house. Everything's fine. She's not going to drink. And then she goes out to dinner one night and just kind of randomly decides, "I'll have a drink." And then she goes on a epic bender when she's dancing, and it's like a 60s movie. And and then Harry Beltic shows up for a second. He's like, Beth, answer me, Beth. She doesn't. She goes to this little local event. She's super hungover. She's a mess. that girl that she played in her first match shows back up, and she says something really sweet to the effect of like, you're like such an inspiration, and I'm so proud to have been able to play you in your first match. And she's like, cool, and bounces.
With her eyeliner all janky
a
and
mess. Yeah.
All hungover.
She goes outside. Yeah, she goes outside. Beltic shows up, and he's like, Beth, things aren't going so well for you. I saw you at the grocery store. And she's like, are you following me? And he's like, no, I work there.
yeah.
The greatest
Your
reveal.
eyes look like my father's.
The greatest reveal of all time.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting too, because like, if you're not the greatest chess player in the world, there's not really money in it. And that's the case for a lot of sports. If you're like a mediocre MMA fighter, you're not making crazy money. You know, if you're a mediocre tennis player or golfer, you're not making crazy money. You're going to end up like as a mechanic or as a grocery store clerk.
If you're an Olympic swimmer and you're not top dog.
Yeah, exactly. It's really cutthroat. And so she has this big moment, and Harry's like, I'm leaving again, and you got to fix things. And then she goes home. She's a mess. And again, just when she needs it, a friend shows up, and it's Jolene. So that's episode 6.
Yeah.
A lot of really good stuff in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stuff also that like, it's a lot of just like chess practice, which, you know, at this point I'm still engaged at this point, but not so much to talk about in that portion of the episode.
Yeah, you kind of feel like you're like, I kind of want Beth to do other things in life because like she deserves that, you know, which is good coming to the end of it all. Yeah, just a few things on the relationships in this episode. I thought it was so in character that one right before they have sex, Benny's like, so you still like my hair? It's like, it's still about him, obviously. And then at the end, he's like, yeah, so like, let's talk about like chess more, like after this and stuff.
First thing. Yeah, chess.
Yeah. And just the stuff about Cleo, I'd love to talk about is, I think her whole ideology is super interesting. And it makes sense that she's really only in like an episode, but like, I kind of wish she was in it more because she's all like, yeah, you know, I do this. Picture me saying this with a great French accent, by the way, but she's just like, yeah, you know, I do this and that, and maybe I'll be in Paris, maybe I won't, like, I'm just going to be around, you know, and I won't be here tomorrow, so like, this is the only night you can see me and stuff. And I think that's a super interesting, and it's like, just like in general in college in my last year, it is just something that happens, you know, you kind of just meet these random people that you only have the opportunity to be with them or see them that night. And it's super interesting. And I'm glad this show like tackled something like that. But again, I wish for all the time they spend on Cleo, I wish there was more of like a point to it all at the end of it. Because I feel like the biggest thing that happens isn't shown and it's off screen. And there's like that bad reveal where like, it's like Beth leaving the room, Cleo in the bed, and then she like turns and it's like you can just see her face, and like that's like supposed to be a big reveal, even though like even when they were in New York, like she was super flirtatious and stuff, and it was like very clear where it was going. And I wish they just like either did something bigger with it, or again, like we talked about, like maybe just cut it out altogether,
just like nothing comes of it, so it doesn't really feel like it ends up mattering at all.
Yeah, because even with Benny, there's that moment of like, oh, so that's what that feels like. If that was like maybe the like button for Cleo's story, I think that could have been interesting. But again, it just kind of like ends with like them being like, maybe something happened. Like if you're not paying attention, it doesn't matter. Like you can like make it up if that offends you type thing. But it is a fun performance. The writing's just a little okay, and also she is again so French, like like infuriatingly French in some ways.
Yeah, I think something that also just didn't work for me was like, we set up that this is gonna be a big moment, this Borgov match. She like wakes up and she just had a huge bender, and she's loses this match. And ultimately, it's because Cleo showed up. Like, it's not because of her. I mean, obviously, her alcoholism and her drug addiction is is what also fuels that. But it's like, it's not as much on her as it should be, I think. Like
It's
that
the
loss
queer
should
character's fault. That's why she
Yeah.
lost it.
It's like, damn it, I'm gay now and I lost.
They're turning the chess players gay.
This is God's punishment.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of, disappointing, because I think it should have been, Cleo shows up and it just won't take no for an answer. And so it's kind of, you can be like, well, if Cleo's not there, she just goes to bed early and then has a really good match against Borgov. But instead, it's not. I wish that she took more action in that storyline. I wish she was more like, no, don't go. Like, if Cleo showed up just for one drink and then Cleo wanted to leave and she's like, no, don't go. Let's actually, let's party. Then I would feel like it was more on her shoulders and it would feel more impactful. But instead, it's not really. It's almost like it's not even Beth's fault.
Maybe they should have shown the night and also how she ended up in the bathtub, because maybe that's her fault. I'm gonna go in the bathtub right now.
She was making out with Zombie Man from Fargo.
Whoa, it's a connected
That's where we
universe.
first see Zombie Man, is in the bathtub.
Hell yeah, no, you're so right, with a bunch of money in there.
Yeah.
Dang.
But what I was going to say was, I feel like if they made it more of her fault, it kind of hammers home the point that was going on throughout the whole series of, like, she has these demons, which at time are ultimately her downfall. But I feel like that kind of gets lost a little bit when it wasn't made out to be like solely her responsibility for what happened.
Totally.
Exactly. Totally agree. All right, moving on to the final episode 7.
We're in the end game now.
We're in the end game now, baby.
Damn, you really did it.
Flashback with the mom again. Just setting up the car crash. She's going to someone's house and she's trying to figure out what to do with Beth. And that's really, I found that to be very painful to watch, when she's like, what's the problem? And her mom says, I'm trying to figure out what to do with you. Like, that's a lot for a kid to handle. Again, I think Beth is one of the most realized characters on TV this year. I really know her, and I know why she is the way she is. And these flashbacks are a big part of that. Then we get Jolene at the house, and just a joy. She just kind of comes in and she's just throwing 150. And she drops the important information. Mr. Scheibel has died, and that's a bummer. But
yeah. And can I say, when I heard that, I was like, dang it, I wanted one more scene with them. And like, I know it's not based off a true story, so like they totally could have done it, but eventually what they do is really sweet too. And I think it's better than a last scene with the two of them.
Jolene tells us all about what she's been up to, and also I've been reading a lot about how people want a Jolene spinoff, because her life is really interesting also. She went to college. She was going to be a PE teacher, basically, and then she got really mad when she started reading history books, and she's decided to do poli-sci instead, and now she's a paralegal, and she's going to become a lawyer. She's going to become a radical. That's a fun line also. It kind of felt out of place, I thought, but in a different movie, it would have been like the best line. It would have been in the trailer and everything. Like, it could have been in the trailer for Chicago 7.
Yeah, I was about to say, it sounds like a line from that movie.
Yeah, where she's like, I didn't know being a radical was a career choice.
And then it would
she's
cut,
like, it will be.
Yeah. Then it would cut to Eddie Redmayne going like, we want to come to Chicago peacefully, but fuck Eddie Redmayne.
You can see Tyler's full thoughts on the Chicago 7 review podcast.
Yeah. Well, I will say, I do like the trial of the Chicago 7. I think I like it more than you, Daniel, so we might talk about it.
I saw it. It was pretty solid.
They drive to the Methuen school. They go to the funeral. It's kind of a small funeral. He's not a man that had a great big impact on a lot of people, but he had the biggest impact on one of the most important people of the decade, probably. They go to the funeral, and then she decides to go into the Methuen school, and she sees the old headmistress, and she had like a hip issue. She fell, and she's like, you better get to class, young lady. And she's like, okay.
She's like a witch now.
Yeah, it was crazy. She goes downstairs into the basement and she sees Mr. Scheibel's room. And she sees that he's been keeping up with her and he has every one of her victories from the newspaper up on the wall in the photograph that they took. And it's so sweet. It's so endearing and lovely. And like I mentioned earlier, his presence is felt through the editing. But I love this reveal. I love that they don't keep in contact throughout the series. I love that they're not on the phone with each other and she's asking him questions. I'm glad that he's not like Yoda for her. Yeah. He was just this guy and who had this run-in with this child and really, really deeply loves her.
Yeah, it reminded me of that song in the Heights where they're looking through the old stuff and like Abuela like kept everything, and it's super sweet. Yeah. And I'm surprised it's not more of a trope because it's literally the best thing ever to just have a character just keep all these clippings and stuff and show that how much they care without ever having to say it.
Love it.
Yeah. Then after that, it's like a funny scene. She goes back home and she's meeting with the two church group ladies that are going to finance her trip to Russia. And they're just like, we need you to say that you hate communism and Marxism. How is that? And she's like, yeah, I guess that's fine. And then they give her that statement that she has to read. And she's like, no, I'm not interested. Speaking again to that point that I made earlier, that whatever she's not interested in, she just doesn't do. So she's like, I don't care. I'll figure out a way to get to Russia. There's that scene with Jolene and Beth, and she fronts the money for her to get to Russia.
They're playing squash.
They're playing squash, yeah. And she basically says like that it's okay. Like she doesn't need the money right now, and she knows that Beth is good for it. So, again, it is sort of the magical black friend showing up and just giving everything to the white character. Mm-hmm.
Here's $3,000.
Yeah, even in this scene, they still address like the racial aspects of it. But then she gets to go to Russia, and there's a funny CIA guy that joins along, and
hell yeah,
he's fun.
Love that guy.
That guy rules. Then we get a whole bunch of matches. She plays a match where the dude just walks out on her, and it's tough, not very civil. Then, guess who shows up in Russia? Oh boy. It's DL Towns, baby.
DL Towns. Hell yeah.
And he's still hot.
His jawline is as sharp as ever.
It's so good. Yeah, so he like gets to be there.
A weird reveal though, I will say. Like she's like leaving, and then he's like, do you have time for a question from me? And she like turns around. Obviously those aren't the lines, but and then she's like,
I wish those were the lines.
I know. In that exact voice. Yeah. Just an odd.
I just realized this. He is very Clark Gable-esque. Like that moment especially is very like Clark Gable from like an old 30s or 40s screwball comedy,
Totally.
Also, a part of the matches that she's playing in Russia, she plays this dude who's old and has sick ass hair, and he's just so cool. When she beats him, he's like the chillest about it, and he's like, "You're awesome. I like you."
He basically says the same line that DL oh my goodness, Towns.
Yeah.
Why do I want to call him Hall?
That's a baseball player.
DL Hewley.
Yeah. But what he says earlier when he's like, how old are you? Never mind. It'll only make me depressed.
Yeah. Like if he heard her age, he'd probably kill himself that night. That's how close he was.
He was a champ. I loved him.
No,
he also was in an earlier scene where they were like all at in like a theater, and he was asleep, and it was just great.
Yeah. No, he the line he's just like, I think I've played the greatest player of all time or something like that. It's awesome. It's great.
Yeah, really great stuff. Anyway, so then with Towns showing up, they have a nice scene in the apartment where he's like, I was just confused. But having him there is really important because then he sets up Tyler's favorite thing in the whole season, the Avengers team on the phone.
I truly, since we're just going through it and talking at the same time, I'll just say this now. I really just didn't like that scene. I thought it was weird, and like it really felt like in Endgame where like all the characters come back and they're like and coming through the fucking portal and stuff, but in this the portal's a phone and they're all like, guess who else is here? And I like half expected that little Russian kid to be in America for some reason, and it's like oh my god, like, oh, by the way, we have the greatest player you've ever played, by the way. And she's like, what, Borgov? And he goes like, I'm not Borgov, but I'm pretty close, or something stupid like that. These are things that go through my head while I watch TV, and,
Dude,
and that's why I was angry.
They might as well have had that kid there. They had the goddamn twins there who suck at chess. They're like...
yeah, exactly.
They're all problem solving how to win this match, and I loved it. I thought it was a fist pumping moment, but it was very silly because just the way that they delivered it was very like Spielbergian.
Yeah, and like Beltic is like, "Hey, I'm here too, Beth," and it's like, "Wait, you hate chess now? You don't want to play chess anymore?"
And also, like, I was thinking about that. Like, it feels like cheating almost. Like you got a hotline full of the best chess players in the world just telling you what to do, but she wins it obviously on intuition. But yeah, so that was great. Then the final match, she's playing Borgov, and it's been going on already. But it's a long ass match, and it's taking forever. And throughout the episode, the Russian people on the streets are building up in numbers and starting to root for Beth Harmon, which is like the Rocky IV thing, which is just so stupid.
We hate our own people. Go America.
Yeah.
We hate
Soviet
commies.
Russia sucks. Yeah.
Those commie bastards.
But then big moment in the match where, and also it's important that Towns is there because we have someone to cut away to in the crowd, which is always good in sports movies. Big moment where Borgov decides to offer a draw and she doesn't take it. And
Borgov never offers draws.
Exactly. Yeah, it never happens. And the guy on the radio also says, like, if she were to take the draw, it would be sort of thought of as a victory for America. Yeah. Same thing happened with Benny with the co-championship thing. She doesn't want it. She wants to win. And so she doesn't take it. Big moment. And as the match is going along, it starts to get out of hand. The things that they had been plotting through the phone don't go the way that it was supposed to go. He's just he's a machine. He's a monster. Even though she keeps saying throughout the season, he's not a machine. Like, he is. He's a machine.
Yeah. And Towns
He's
is all
a chess
like...
machine.
Yeah. Towns is all like in the audience like, he's not supposed to do that. He's talking to no one. He's just saying it out loud.
Everyone's like, shut up.
Shut up.
Yeah, everyone's like, shh. They can hear you. You're like 6 feet away.
Yeah. Like Borgov like looks over like... I'm gonna do what I want to do, dude.
And then just when you think she's gonna lose, and again she's sober at this time, she looks up at the ceiling and she sees the chess pieces moving, and that's really important for the drug addiction storyline. It's very important for her to win the match. It's a really great moment. I was in bed. It was about 10 o'clock when I was watching, and I jumped up out of bed. I was so hyped because the music swells and she sees it, and then it's really funny after that too because like everybody looks up. they're like, what are you looking at?
The light reminds her of the light in Scheibel's basement.
Yeah, it looks exactly and everything just perfectly works, and she sees the chess match. They play, and I love the way that the match finishes. She moves her piece over one spot, and then it cuts to this very extremely wide shot from the chessboard up at her, and she looks like, oh my God, have I just won? And then it cuts back to Borgov, and he says that she has won. It's your match. Hands her the piece and says, take it. They exchange, and he has just the most kind things to say. And she's won, and the crowd goes nuts. And Mother Russia is American now.
Fuck those
It's
communist
amazing.
America has
bastards.
won the Cold War.
Yeah, Beth Harmon single-handedly won the Cold War against Borgov. God, I mean, so good. And then to cap off the episode, she is on her way home and she decides, I'm not, like, again, she's just going to do whatever she wants. She's like, I'm going to go take a walk through the park. She walks through the park. It's actually, like, I love the way that that's shot. It reminded me of Cleo from 5 to 7 also.
I was about to say it. It's the exact last shot almost.
Yeah. And then she goes walking past people playing chess, and somebody asks, would you like to play? She sits down and she says, let's play. And
she literally destroys all of those Russian men. Some die of heart attacks.
And those who survive become grocery store clerks.
Exactly. There's just madness in the Russian square.
So it all ends really positively for Beth, and it ends with let's play. It's a game. It's fun. It's joyful. Yeah. And she beats. Well, maybe she doesn't beat her drug addiction, but at least for the time being, she does. She's able to play clean, and she comes out on top. She has a real remarkable hero's journey, and she's successful in the end. With
an old man that looks a lot like Mr. Scheibel, it's pretty sweet.
The whole series is really good. I think it could have been like 30 minutes shorter maybe, but in this last episode, I love everything that happens. I love all the stuff with Jolene. I love all the stuff with Mr. Scheibel. I love when they get to Russia. I think the way that they shoot the matches in Russia is really great. And then that final Borgov match feels impossible to win. And that's what you need. And then she wins. And you get everything with this show. It is dark and dramatic at times and sad, but it's so joyous and so happy and so full of life. And her winning in the end is really important, I think.
Because, like we said, we've been talking about it. She ends the Cold War. No,
that's really the moral I took away from it. In order to defeat the Russians, and now some might say the Chinese, we just have to beat them at chess.
And you have to look up and do it in your head. No, but on a serious note, it is a great wrap up. And as much as I do hate that little in-game scene, I think it's super necessary in a lot of ways to get all those characters in there in some ways and to help them, because they're not all going to be in Russia. I think that would have been worse. But it is nice that in some way they can help Beth win at the end. I think it's important to show that she's like not alone anymore. Which she's a character who was alone at the start of this. Her mother was kind of crazy and didn't know what to do with her and died. And then she had these other figures who left her, but she still has all her friends. And even like the Mr. Scheibel stuff is perfect and it's wonderful and great. But yeah, it's definitely a great episode. And I also just want to touch on this. I love all the Russian crowd like getting hyped, and I love that kid running outside and yelling the move. Just like it just makes it feel like bigger than it actually is. They do little stuff like that throughout. That's really nice this episode.
Are there any things that you want to talk about before we finish this up? Any loose threads? Overall thoughts on the show? As when you finished it, what were you thinking? Like, what was your immediate thought when you finished the show?
I just felt like warm after I finished it. Like we talked about it earlier, but it was like nice to have something in 2020 that had like a very sweet, happy ending to it. Just felt warm, very cozy ending.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't stop thinking about how she's just
how we ended the Cold War.
Yeah, no, I couldn't. Yeah, that definitely. Go America, fuck the commies. No, I'm kidding. But I couldn't stop thinking about how she's just going to destroy those Russian men in chess. And then I thought, because for the first time the credits were actually like it was an actual credit sequence, like they had like a fucking like a designed sequence, and for the other episodes it was just like a black background, and I wouldn't be surprised if Scott Frank was like, oh, I want no credits until the very end, but they're like, no, you kind of have to because people work hard every episode, and he's like, okay, fine, like this is what I'll do here. But it definitely felt like the end of a saga that we had been watching. It feels a lot like Harry Potter in some ways, just like a child becoming an adult through magic, but in this case it's chess, which to some is magic, I suppose. But it is really just, it is a heartwarming thing, like Jack was saying. And it's also just, I think it's genuinely like an important piece of media right now to show such an intelligent individual that isn't afraid of sexuality and like just thinking about life in general. It's not just all about this one thing. There's so much more to this series, and I just came away thinking like, wow, like this is something I absolutely love and really appreciate. Definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite pieces of media from 2020. There's so much that we didn't talk about, so much that we didn't get to highlight too much. Obviously, the costume designing and the set design and the music, everything all coalesced into this really terrific show. I'm hoping and praying that there's not a season 2, because I know
Yes.
Netflix wants that money.
Yeah.
But
Please no.
Like you said, yeah, it wraps up so effectively, and it was so beautiful. And so I'm really happy that we got this show this year. And it was a really good year in television, I thought. But this is definitely up at the top of the list for me in terms of shows that came out this year. So I think that's going to do it for us. Thanks for listening to our Queen's Gambit podcast. Let us know if there are other shows or other movies that you want to hear about. And again, thank you so much for listening. I'm Daniel.
I'm Tyler.
And I am Jack.
And thank you for listening. Have a nice day.
Let's play.
Woohoo! And cut.